Good evening. It is Tuesday, January 7th. It's 6:01 p.m. I'm calling the Budget Committee to order. We're going to get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. After that, I just want to remain standing for maybe 30 seconds to recognize we lost one of our committee members recently. Richard Fletcher passed away. So just a moment of silence for that after, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, next on the list is the roll call. Samantha, go ahead.
Samantha Kearns.
Olivia Welch-Erdoff.
Elizabeth DeBrule.
Mark Bernard.
Kelly Boyer, Select Board Rep.
Jared Talbot, School Board Rep.
Joe Alexander.
Frank Hobbs. Doug Pounds.
Israel Carey.
Brian Mazer.
Peter Grigorakakis.
Laura Stevens. Allison DeCesare.
Richard Manzo.
And we have some staff here, as well as members of the public. So with that, is there anyone here for public comment? There's an opportunity after the meeting as well. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Next up, approval of minutes. Danielle indicated that there's 2 sets of minutes online ready for the committee to review. I'm not going to call for a vote on them right now, but they'll be posted online, and there's 2 more being drafted now. So probably by next Tuesday, after the public hearing, we'll probably have some votes on approving minutes. So just review those online. If you need us to send you a link to the minutes, we can do that as well. So old business, I want to get started with a tentative agreement between the professional firefighters at Goffstown and the town of Goffstown. So I'm just going to call on Derek and Danielle to come up and present the CBA for the firefighters. Oh, and Chief. Sure.
Good evening. Thank you. You all should have a memorandum dated today with details of the tentative agreement between the town and the professional firefighters of Goffstown. I want to go through it kind of page by page, step by step, and talk about what the current job market is for firefighters in New Hampshire and specifically southern New Hampshire. The turnover that the department has experienced over the last 2 CBAs, over the last 6 years, the accomplishments that we have with the language in the tentative agreement, and then we'll finish up with any cost items. So the job market in the state of New Hampshire is very difficult to both recruit and retain qualified firefighters. And the fire chief can kind of speak to that a little bit probably at the end, but in 2022, the state of New Hampshire, actually, the Department of Safety got a group of fire chiefs and other state and local officials together to talk about this problem. And they came out with a list of recommendations for departments to implement to improve recruitment and retainment. And Goffstown has implemented many of those, and they've actually gone beyond those steps. The fire department has implemented the Department of Defense Skill Bridge. That is a program that takes people that are near the end of their active duty tenure with the Department of Defense, and they actually come in and they start training to become a local firefighter with DOD, covering their wages during that transitional period. The fire department is also working with St. Anselm College to have interns help with the ambulance and the EMTs and paramedics and learn that role to provide some support to our firefighters who also work on the EMS calls as well. So a couple weeks ago when we started pulling data together, the deputy chief and the chief provided that there are 40 full-time departments within the state of New Hampshire, and 35 of them were hiring or actively hiring at that time. And I looked this afternoon and there were 3 more departments that had added to those ranks. So Derry, Rochester, and Merrimack within the last 5 days are starting to advertise that they're looking for full-time firefighters. Both Manchester and Nashua are advertising that they will be hiring 10 or more doing recruit schools in the beginning of 2025. And that's a big concern for us because both Manchester and Nashua do not provide EMS transport. Their firefighters are strictly firefighters. They only do firefighting duties. They will arrive at the scene and provide first responder aid, but ultimately AMR will come in and do all the EMS transport. So that's a big concern for us, especially in a few minutes you see our turnover. We've lost quite a few firefighters to both Manchester and Nashua. Also, there's just been a big change in the fire service in the last 10 years. We're seeing fewer applicants and qualified candidates come through. A lot of that is due to societal changes. I think working with the prior fire chief and this fire chief, the impact that COVID had on our firefighters as they were doing EMS transport was a huge, those first 6 months of COVID was very difficult for them. You're also seeing younger kids come up that do less manual labor as kids and are looking for other careers. So it's really difficult to get people interested in this type of career. Additionally, in 2011, the state, responding to the recession at that point, completely changed the way New Hampshire retirement works for these individuals. Previously, they were able to retire at 45 and start receiving their pension. That got increased to 55 years old. There's also a reduction in the types of pays that are included in that calculation, and there's a longer minimum year requirement. So that really changed the benefit that had previously been there. And also, I think we're also understanding impact on the physical and mental health of these people that are working in 24-hour shifts, and better understanding the risks that these firefighters face with the additional plastics and everything that are in these fires and the chemicals that are being released. So fortunately, the state of New Hampshire has started doing cancer screenings for full-time and for firefighters, so it's great to see that, but that risk still exists. There's also some additional market data that's attached. What we did is we provided this is after page 4, a comparison of some of the departments that we compared to. I will have Danielle send this out to you electronically. I know the print is a little bit small on that. And then 2024 New Hampshire occupational and employment and wages for both the state, but also for the Manchester and the Nashua Dairy region to kind of show what those going rates for firefighters are. I'll continue on to page 2 and talk a little bit about the turnover of full-time firefighters here in Goffstown. Over the last 6 years, which is the last 2 collective bargaining agreements, we've lost 29 full-time firefighters. Now, 10 of those have been for firefighters that have left fire service completely. Either they've retired or they've left fire service for another career or some other reason. But 19 of those have left service to go serve at another full-time New Hampshire Fire Department. And as I previously stated, 6 of those have gone to Manchester and 3 of those are going to Nashua. So about half of the firefighters that go to other agencies are going to agencies that don't have to do EMS transport. And that is one of the communities that we'll be competing with in the coming years. And as I said, they're going to be having double-digit recruit schools that they're going to be bringing people in. So we have a lot of new personnel, and that provides a lot of stress on some of our what is right now a very young floor staff between our firefighters, our master firefighters, and our lieutenants. Those are the 3 job designations covered by the CBA. They are training each other, so they're constantly training new staff. And those more experienced staff that are put in leadership roles early in their career, they're not getting the opportunity to do some of the technical rescue training or mass casualty incident training that other departments are able to do. We just simply don't have that staff to do that. And it's also impacting our fire apparatus. So most of our fire apparatus crashes within the last 3 years have been for those new firefighters that are just learning and they're starting to get their CDLB and they're starting to learn how to use it. So that's a big issue. And then finally, you're just putting a lot of stress on these employees. Right now we're down 4 full-time staff. That means when you're down that staff, we don't change the number of fire calls or EMS calls we get. What you're doing is you're having each individual respond to more calls, having to do more reports, having less time to recover and recharge and get ready for that next one. They're covering overtime shifts, or they're getting right back to the station knowing that they're going to have to go right out again for another one. And additionally, pointing back to the PowerPoint presentation that was given to the Budget Committee, right now, the NFPA standards for an engine in our tower are to have 4 people on that device. We have at best 3. So that means when we're fully staffed, you're sending out at best 3. If you have somebody calling sick or you've got somebody that's out for some other reason, you're going to have to maybe potentially take it out with less than that if it's safe enough to do.
And if they have to go on the engine for a fire call, an ambulance goes unstaffed. So we're cross, we call it cross manning. So they don't come in the morning and say, you're on the engine for your 24-hour shift. They're actually, if it's a fire call, the engine's going. If it's an EMS call, the ambulance is going. And if it's serious enough, breathing difficulty, heart attack, strokes, then one engine goes also for the manpower to get them out of the house, second, third floors of houses and stuff. So you get your fire engine for a fire call, and you don't staff the ambulance. So you hope another call doesn't come in, but we have a high number of back-to-back calls. I mean, we're at the point right now where I fully expect when they get one call, within 10 minutes, they'll get another call, whether fire or EMS. So, that's the,
Elizabeth, go ahead.
So if your vacancies were filled, would you have sufficient staff to then have 4 people on an engine? Or, so, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, is this a problem of filling vacancies, or is this a problem of filling vacancies and not having the right number of positions?
so the immediate need, and as you know that I focused on this year, is to getting us to fill our vacancies. That does not meet the NFPA standards. That's a whole nother, need for staffing in the future.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't even, think of going with additional staff. And
Right.
I need to get up to, just to have full staffing.
And when you said that some of them weren't getting training in some of these, I'm sorry, what'd you call them, leadership skills? I'm sorry.
Advanced
Some of the advanced.
technical rescue.
Okay, advanced technical rescue, is that because that training costs money, or because we don't have the staff to release them to go to the training, or
That's
why is
part of
that?
it. They start their shift at 8 in the morning, and they can literally spend the entire day responding to fire or EMS emergencies. This past weekend, the crew came on at 8 a.m., and they immediately got a call for a person that fell through the ice up at Mountain Base, right? So at 8 o'clock in the morning, both stations went up there, an ambulance, an engine, and another crew, because it could have been a potential ice rescue. Fortunately, the guy went up to his chest and someone threw a rope to him before we got there. But, so that's the type of continual, and why we need to be at least full staff. But it does not meet the national standard.
So that's kind of the bad news that we went into these negotiations with. And this is not unique to Goffstown. A lot of southern New Hampshire fire agencies are feeling similar problems. There's just fewer candidates that are coming through the fire academy, and they're coming from other states. So, but that is kind of the context that we went into this negotiation with. So if you continue on page 3, we did have very good and fruitful negotiations with the professional firefighters of Goffstown throughout the summer and throughout the fall. And I think we accomplished the following goals with the tentative agreement. We've provided stability and predictability to retain current Goffstown firefighters with a 3-year. We felt the 3-year term was a good length, that especially that these firefighters are very comfortable with. It shows them where they are going to proceed in their career here over the next 3 years, and give them, and also show them that there is kind of that light at the end of the tunnel that will be able to bring on newer firefighters as well. We have what we believe is a competitive wage and benefits to retain and recruit. Now, what that means is we are going to be, due to balancing that need for competitive wages, but also understanding what the ballot number needs to be to garner votes, is we are really shooting at right at about the average of other full-time fire departments. We're right at about that 55th percentile of what other departments have for firefighters, master firefighters, and fire lieutenants. Now, master firefighter is a designation that we adopted and we negotiated during the last round of CBA negotiations. We're a smaller department. We only have right now 4 lieutenants on staff. And we realized that eventually firefighters would get to a point in their career where they would see, I'm not going to be able to progress because that person has another 10 years in that position before they're going to move out. So we created a master firefighter to recognize that additional training that those firefighters received, and that has worked out very well for us, but not all the departments across New Hampshire have that. So we really shot for right at the average of what other full-time departments that we compete with. And then in years 2 and 3 of the CBA, we've applied a 3% matrix adjustment. I think one of the things we found with this last CBA, as we came into negotiations, our starting salary for uncertified or brand-new firefighters was not as competitive with other departments that we're competing with. We were a full, $1.50 to $2.50 short of all these other departments per hour. So we've applied a matrix adjustment in years 2 and 3 to try and stay on point, and we are also able to look at other agencies that have CBAs that go into 26. There weren't many that went into 27, but to kind of get an idea of where other departments are going. We've also strategically increased longevity as early as the 5th year, because again, for those people that are leaving for other full-time departments, we're averaging about right around that 3.8 years of experience with Goffstown is when they are jumping to other departments. We addressed language that was kept in from the last relative to the fire inspector. That position has moved over to the captain of risk reduction. We worked with them on some updates to disciplinary language, some clarification about required training and optional educational opportunities, as well as other cleanups. And then we worked with the union to develop 36-month training agreement. So this is very similar to what our patrol unions have, where it's a huge investment by the town to train a brand-new person coming into the fire service. And then if you lose them after a year or a year and a half, it's you kind of see that loss. So we've worked with the fire union. They had some concerns about that, but that 36-month training agreement, I think we crafted it in such a way that it will get people to take a couple, think a little bit longer before they jump within that first 3 years, but it also allows the fire department to do some lateral transfers. We really worked on the language in it that lateral transfer wouldn't necessarily be subject to it. We also previously had a probationary rate that everybody was subject to when they came over, whether they were a lateral transfer or a brand-new firefighter. We've changed the language in the agreement for that to allow more lateral transfers that would be based on their years of experience and their certifications. And then on the 4th page, you have.
Hey, Derek, just a quick question. Going back to the strategically adjusted longevity age, where it says 5 to 10 years, what does that 5 to 10 mean? Is there like a graduated?
So this group and their last agreement, so back in 2015, all non-union as well as union employees throughout the town had a longevity schedule. And at year 8, it started to kick in. So in years 8 and 9, you got $400 in December, and then it would go up every 2 years. That started being phased out in 2015. So in 2015, the select board took that away, and they changed the personnel plan for non-union employees. Then a few years, every couple of years, they would phase it out from union contracts as well. So during our last round of negotiations, we phased it out with this firefighter group, and we put all new hires on a new schedule that they had to work, I think it was 20 years before anything started to kick in. And what we realized is you're really creating two classes of employees, and really depending on when they brought in. So, I mean, this is a very moderate change. I mean, when you're on your 5th year, you get $100. It's really not that much, but it is to kind of start to get them in that program. One, we brought them back onto the longevity, and we got everybody on the same scale, but then we start to do incremental increases in years 5, 6, and 7, and then it's every 2 years thereafter.
So is this additional pay they receive per year?
They receive it,
Steps
yep,
up every?
every 2 years once you get to year 8, yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And just so you're aware, other towns are doing this, they're doing it on a different scale. Hooksett, every 3 years, it's a $3,000 bonus. We're giving $100 at year 5, $200 at year 6. There are other departments, like I said, Hooksett has the ability to do sign-on bonuses, but they also, their longevity is starting in year 6, then 9, every 3 years, it's a $3,000 bonus. That's kind of the thing that we're up against. So on the final page of the memo, you have the cost. We've got it broken down by the wage adjustment. We've added an 11th holiday, which you'll see on the following page is very standard for New Hampshire fire departments, as well as matches our non-union and our other union contracts, increases in longevity, and then the Medicare rate and New Hampshire retirement rate. So in year 1, the ballot increases would be just under $137,000. Year 2, just over $182,000. And in year 3, it would be about $106,000. And then what I did is I broke that down of what that tax rate impact is. So you're talking about a nickel in the first year, 6.5 cents in the second year, and just under 4 cents in the fourth year. So for the median single-family property owner, you're talking about an increase of $20 to $25 each year of the contract.
Elizabeth?
So why does it go down in year 3 if it's a 3% annual increase?
Because we're only doing, because we give our raises out on July 1st. So you're
So it's a
seeing.
half a year?
You're seeing, yeah, it's the half a year.
Okay. I really like this estimated tax impact statement. I think that's very helpful to include and help people see that. Okay, and then, I don't want to open this can of worms, but was there a comparison to bring them up to 60%, as we've done with non-union employees?
So I think going back to the non-union employees, those funds were, or that wage study was done in 2023 using data from 2023 and the prior year, because we started that in June of 2023 when a lot of towns are on July 1st increases, and we implemented it a full year later at that rate. There was no escalation to bring those 2023 study into 2024.
So they're not at quite 60%.
Whereas fire, we have the ability, because CBAs are public documents, we can look at the departments that we're competing against that are under contract, and we can see where they're going.
Okay. So I'm trying to get a sense of the equity across all the 4 unions and the non-union employees. And is this in line with those other departments, or?
We believe it is.
Okay.
We believe it is.
So there
We're-
isn't more adjustment to be made to this or any of the other unions to get everybody on the same level?
We don't,
They're each individual contract, so each one negotiates their own contract. But
Right.
when Derek and Danielle are negotiating, they do, weigh that, keep it in mind so that you don't get out of balance.
yeah, we try to, and we also looked at where these firefighters, and especially our lieutenants, would be in comparison to our fire captains, which are non-union, because we didn't want to create compression there either. we didn't want to get to a point where we had union fire lieutenants who are hourly and have the ability to earn overtime are at a higher hour, or a very close hourly rate with those fire captains that are salary.
Right.
So we took that into account as well.
Okay.
Jared?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Derek, I was looking through this. I know that you said some things that aren't listed here, such as it's a 3% increase year over year. I just want to make sure that is correct.
So we adjusted the matrix in the first year. That is not a 3%
Yep,
increase.
we'll get to, that's my second
But yes,
question.
in year 2 and year 3, it is a 3% matrix adjustment.
So what was the increase to the matrix at year 1 from current state?
It was actually, we can have a better idea. So
It was a rebuilt matrix.
it was a rebuilt matrix.
So we changed how many steps, and then for the master firefighter, it used to be a 10-step scale, and that was brought to a single flat rate, rather than steps for people who've reached that designation level. So it's a new model, and everybody is placed onto that new model. So it ranges based on where they were in the old matrix, what adjustment they get. So
From
some
matrix to
people-
matrix, what is the actual increase?
There is no direct comparison
It
because
has
it's
to
an
be, because you
apple
have a
and an
bottom line
orange.
number and people, so what would that be?
So what I can provide you at the public hearing
Yeah.
is the, I guess, the average increase that firefighters, master firefighters, and fire lieutenants receive. Because again, we looked at those independently, and we looked at what are fire lieutenants in our, so I can get a number for you, but we
Okay.
didn't do a simple,
Yeah, I'm not looking for the different levels. I'm looking for totality of what the matrix was to what we're going to. Is it a 7% increase, a 3% increase, a 12% increase? That's what I'm looking for from a taxpayer standpoint. What was the reset that we're using from a matrix perspective for
I
year
guess.
one?
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I just want to make sure I can have that information for you for the public hearing, because the master firefighters, because we put them at 8% above the top level on a firefighter, a master firefighter that's at a step 4 or 5 is getting a lower percentage increase than a master firefighter that's in year 1 or 2, because they're jumping to a same level. So I think that's why we can probably give you averages.
Yeah. Of
Does
one
that work?
contract to the next one, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, can I ask Jared, with all due respect, what difference does it make? I mean, if we're trying to get everybody on a level playing field, if we're trying to treat all of our employees the same, treat all the unions the same, what difference does it make what the percentage increase is, especially when we have a dollar amount?
This is a question asked for every collective bargaining agreement, whether it's teachers, whether it's fire, whether it's police. But if we're asking
Okay.
for a new contract, I'd like to understand what the increase is from our current state so that we can have that data point to move forward with.
Yeah, but if the point is, if we're trying to correct.
That's what I like,
If we're
thank you.
trying to correct old problems or existing problems, then I mean, it can, I have no idea what the percentage is. If they don't know, I certainly don't know. But, you know, I would hate to think that a voter looks at it and says, it's a 15% increase, forget it, I'm not voting. Well, if they were really underpaid before and we have a vacancy.
If I can respond to this?
Then.
So this is also another thing to say, how bad have we been in the past? And how more aggressive do we need to be in the future? So it's a data point to make, one data point, and a totality of data points to make a decision.
Okay.
I know that this has been approved by the select board, at least I think it has. I know I'm going to support it because it's needed. But again, it's just something that we need to understand so that how are we going to negotiate better next time?
Okay, fair enough. I mean, and I'm all in favor of multiple data points, okay? I'm all about that triangulation of information. But I also, I'm again concerned about the impact of social media and the inclination people have to cherry pick facts and omit other really critical facts that then distort things for the voters, and now the voters don't have the information they need to make good decisions. So that's I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just trying to point out, I think context is everything. It's everything. So I just worry that things will get plucked out of context and will cause a lot of harm.
Yeah, and I understand that concern. I will also say that typically CBAs have done better
They have.
in the March elections than like other budget items.
Yeah.
So,
That is
you know,
true.
people want to go out there and support the firefighters, they will. So I think yes, like there is some trepidation there, but I think also, Jared, if we need this information, we should be able to get it.
Oh, absolutely.
And, like, I plan on supporting this too. You know, like, typically voters have voted for this stuff, so.
Okay.
Are there other questions for Derek, Danielle,
Yeah,
Jean Marie?
Just a
Go ahead.
comment, yeah, Elizabeth, and I believe in transparency too as well. I think that's always a good thing for people to understand, rightly or wrongly. You know, you're right, people can twist and make up things, and I agree with you that way, so, but we still have to be transparent, I think, at the same time.
All right, other questions about the CDA? Jared?
Just as a general one, this was presented to the select board. Did they vote on this
Yeah, it
yesterday?
says-
They did, they voted on it last night. They voted to unanimously approve the agreement and recommend the cost items.
That was 5-0?
Yes.
Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a general question for the chief, I guess. Is there any community that actually is meeting fire standards today?
Yes, some of your larger departments, Manchester, you know, Nashua, they do because of the sheer amount of personnel that they have.
Gotcha, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so, Derek, Danielle, can you plan on presenting this next week at the public hearing?
Yes, and we'll have an answer to Jared's question.
Perfect. So I'm not going to ask, we don't have to vote on this today. We vote on this after the public hearing. So, but at least I wanted the presentation today, so we had time to mull it over and get the information before we voted. So thank you very much. Next up on the agenda is I want to go, we'll stay on the town side for now, and talk about the fire apparatus CRF deposit. So go ahead.
Okay, so again, you have another quick memo on this item, and I'll ask Danielle to share this with you electronically. But this year, the Select Board have supported a warrant article to deposit $350,000 into the Fire Apparatus Capital Reserve Fund, with that amount to come from unassigned fund balance. What I first wanted to provide you was a little bit of history of the CRF, some of the benefits that we've seen over the last 16 years, and then also how the CRF will need to be funded into the future. So part of the history is this was established at town meeting in 2008, and going through some of the history, this actually came out of a recommendation from the town's capital improvement committee. So they are a subcommittee of the planning board. They really look at the capital investments that the town needs to make over a 6-year period. And at that time, Goffstown had quite a bit of aging fire apparatus. So they were looking for a solution on how to do that. And the CIP committee recommend that the town implement a fire apparatus capital reserve fund. So the select board, with support from the budget committee and the town voters, established a capital reserve fund that the select board are the agents of, and they deposited $420,000 into it in that first year. Now, subsequently, the next year, there was a request for a $500,000 deposit into that fund. That failed. And then in 2012, there was a request to put $75,000 into that, and that failed as well. But from 2013 to 2023, the voters have voted to deposit $2,125,000, and there is a typo there, I apologize. Should be $2,125,000 into the Fire Apparatus Capital Reserve Fund. In 23 and 2014, those were tax appropriations. In 2015 through 2023, it came from fund balance. And over the last 16 years, the town has been able to purchase 8 pieces of capital fire apparatus, and those are highlighted here. Now, in 2009, we were fortunate enough to get a FEMA grant that was about 75% for the aerial ladder truck. That actually replaced 2 aging ladder trucks that were being used by the fire department. And then 2 years later, they bought Tanker 1 using $142,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund and $550,000 from tax appropriation. And that replaced 2 older trucks at the same time, an engine and a tanker. And then over the years, we've replaced 2 command vehicles, 2 engines, a boat, and a UTV, purchase a UTV. So one of the benefits that this fire apparatus capital reserve has given to both the fire department and taxpayers is it avoids spikes in property taxes as you're spreading that cost out over multiple years. For anybody watching at home, it's very similar to a savings account where you would save up for a major purchase. It also avoids borrowing costs. Rather than bonding these items and paying a borrowing percentage on them, we are avoiding that. And that was really what the CIP committee looked at. They were specifically looking to avoid those property spikes, but also avoid borrowing costs. Additionally, this money is maintained or overseen by the trustees of the trust fund, and this money is in New Hampshire Public Deposit Investment Pool. And since 2008, this capital reserve fund has earned $113,738 in interest. And in just the last 5 years, we've actually earned about $80,000 worth of interest that just builds up in that capital reserve fund. Additionally, by having in our purchase in 2022, the Pierce pumper, we were able to get a prepayment discount of just over $26,000, and the total cost of that apparatus was about $700,000. And additionally, another benefit is while we are always going to have to be mindful of how wages impact the taxpayers, having up-to-date and well-maintained apparatus is a recruitment tool as well as a retention tool. So we see that as another tool in our toolbox to have qualified firefighters working for the town. And then finally, I wanted to provide you with a look in the future. The fire department maintains a 20-year apparatus matrix, and they present that annually to the CIP committee. And annually, they weigh where those individual fire apparatus are, what they're seeing in repairs, what they're seeing in the state of the vehicle, and they will shift them as needed appropriately. But the matrix that was presented to CIP this past spring, there were 3 vehicles or 3 major pieces of apparatus that need to be replaced within the next 8 years. Now again, next year at CIP or a couple of years down the line, that might change. But right now, in 2024, the fire department has, in 2026, a projected replacement of engine 3, which at that time will be 21 years old. And just a reminder, I think the fire chief stated it, but I'll state it again. The date of order to the date of delivery for a fire truck of these magnitudes has gone from 18 months to 2 years, where it was a couple years ago. Now you're talking probably about 4 years before you get it delivered. So in 2026, engine 3 is going to be 21 years old, and that would be an $800,000 replacement projected. In 2030, you have a projected replacement of Tower 1. That was the one that was bought in 2010, and that would be just over $2 million cost. And in 2032, there'd be a projected replacement of Tanker 1, which would at that point be 20 years old. But again, date of delivery could be up to 4 years later than that. The other benefit that's not stated here in the memo is really that having those funds set aside in that capital reserve fund, it also allows the fire department to pursue grant opportunities. And that's really how we were able to take advantage of a 75% FEMA grant in 2009 and replace 2 aging ladder trucks with the tower truck that we have now. On the bottom of page 2, you have the proposed warrant article language that staff has recommended to the select board. I will note, this does, I believe, follow the wishes of the budget committee, and ultimately, but the select board has not taken final vote on that, but we will ask them to provide a vote and final warrant article language for your public hearing next week. And then finally, on the last page, you just kind of have a history of the fire apparatus capital reserve fund, the balances, the deposits, and the disbursements out of it. Again, if you look into 2030, 2031, and 2032, you can see that balance dips below zero. We don't anticipate that actually occurring, but at some point, the fire department will either need to consider whether they're going to push apparatus out longer, or if they're going to have to come to the select board and the budget committee and the voters to ask for additional deposits or larger deposits into the fire apparatus capital reserve fund.
All right, questions for Derek? Frank?
Thank you, Derek. Do you have a current CRF balance? It looks like it's approximately 750,000-ish.
Good guess. It's, the end of the year, 2024, was $768,329.64.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
We did the language thing really, really early. I'm trying to remember what it was. I thought it was something about no new taxation. Was it,
Previous taxation.
but wasn't, do you remember the wording? Do you still have the motion, Joe?
Yeah, I do.
I would say, I know for us, it was no new amount to be raised from taxation. That's what we put in ours, I believe.
Okay.
We would be very, we would be more, we would think that.
Is it improvement?
More clear.
That would be more clear as well, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is confusing. I think it is confusing. I think it's not clear that it's not, I just don't know if people are gonna understand where, I mean, first we say, well, it's in addition to the operating budget, but it's from the unassigned fund balance. I don't think voters are gonna understand what that means.
So the first parentheses, this appropriation is in addition to the operating budget article. That's
DRA
required
says
by
we have to do
DRA.
it,
We
yeah.
have to have that, but yes, I can hear what you're saying.
So I don't know if the language can be consistent, or, I don't remember what we voted on.
Jared, what does the
Exactly.
what does the school side say exactly? You
So
haven't
we
voted
didn't-
on it yet, have
we-
you?
What is
we
Kelly?
did, but
Kelly,
we-
do you have the motion?
The budget committee didn't vote on motion. It was a recommendation.
We had a
So it was a
recommendation, we didn't have a
recommendation?
motion.
When we get to the school board, what we used is blah, 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 the sum from unassigned fund balance surplus available for transfer for us July 1st. No new amount to be raised from taxation.
Okay.
So it does, I mean, ours, and I'm sure it's very similar, it does mention the unassigned fund balance and that no new taxation was going to be used to appropriate this, whatever this is.
Is that acceptable to the committee?
I think new is the only change from the old, right?
That's what I remember that we had requested, that we add that word so
That's-
people understood.
So that we're
But-
both saying this is taxation, but it's not new taxation, so we're being
Right.
accurate in that regard.
I need a minute to look, but
I think the language should be consistent between the two sides.
well, we can't like tell this, I mean, we made recommendations on it. I don't know, I think adding new is important, like no new taxation. But Kelly, is there any insight on what has the select board talked about that language change at
I
all?
mean, we did when I initially presented it, but we haven't talked about this specifically.
Okay.
We'll be talking about it on Monday.
Okay. Derek, can you tell me about the warrant article that failed last year? What was the dollar amount?
250,000.
250, and the proposal this year is 350?
Correct.
The difference, I think, is last year it was to be from tax appropriation.
Okay, so this is coming from the unassigned fund balance.
Yes.
And select board's made that, that's the one, okay.
We have to formally vote on it, but we're all in agreement that this is what
Okay.
we're doing. That was in an effort last year to raise our amount that we have to hold in the unassigned fund balance, so we didn't disperse anything from unassigned fund balance last year.
Before that, though, didn't it usually come from the unassigned fund balance?
From 20, I think I've got it on page 1, from 2015 to 2023, it came from fund balance.
Okay.
But again, that fund balance is a calculation of what we collect for the
Right.
town, school, and county. So as
Right.
those other entities, that percentage drops down as well.
So do we earn interest on money in the fund balance?
Yeah, Derek,
We,
that was in the memo.
well, I know we earn money on
Oh,
the
in the- oh,
CRF, but do we earn interest on the money in the unreserved fund balance? Because it's
For the
not
portion-
really money
for-
in an unreserved fund, right? It's a paper,
Correct. So for the part that is liquidated cash, yes, we do invest that in investment accounts through our bank and through the New Hampshire Public Deposit Pool. And we can earn interest on those amounts that we use for cash flow. However, you're correct that not all unassigned fund balance on the town side is truly cash dollars. It also includes receivables owed to the town and other short-term receivable type items that are captured in that calculation and assets as well.
so is it accurate to say that we earn more interest if the money is in the capital reserve fund than we do if it's in the
Correct.
unreserved fund balance?
Yes.
And
I-
also, it gets designated
For a specific
for that
purpose.
specific purpose. If we're taking, when we collect taxes in July and December, there's a transfer made to those into those investment accounts. That comes as a revenue to the general fund, so it helps offset the amount of taxes we collect each year, but it's a revenue. Whereas if you put these funds into the capital reserve fund, any interest stays in that capital reserve fund.
So
And to-
ultimately, it makes it cheaper to buy your,
And to your point, back when I did some research, on May 2nd of this year, there was 742,408. And then as you just heard Derek, we're up to
768. We're getting about 5% a month right now on our capital reserve funds.
okay.
Were you looking for this? Were you looking for this?
That's what I was looking for,
Is
yeah.
that what you were looking for? Did you?
Yeah, can you read what that language said?
Yeah, so, we didn't vote on this, just so everyone knows. So it was a motion to recommend to the Town of Goffstown governing bodies only use warrant article language that identifies the funding source for appropriation articles. Governing bodies should refrain from identifying unassigned fund balance as not being raised by taxation. It is important that community, and this is the rationale, it's important that community members understand that articles passed through the legislative body, the voting members of the town, are funded by taxation or other identified funding sources such as grants. This will allow a better understanding of what tax money is used for and to ensure budgeting practices and disciplines are used by the governing bodies. Generalized consensus from the community is that items funded by an unreserved fund balance are not taxed, when in reality there is an underspend of the existing budget or an overcollection of revenue that is not being returned to the taxpayer to offset the tax rate. And so I feel like this warrant article kind of matches.
So the committee did have several discussions following
Yeah.
that original handout. And we did take note of all of those in the minutes. And I do recall there being a lot of discussion around the word new being
Yes.
factored into
Right.
that.
Because I mean, I know that I didn't support this exactly as it was written, but I do like what this has on it right now. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
So I'll have that information available for the select board's discussion as well on Monday.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Kelly, this is a question for you. Was the rationale of the select board that the funding mechanism, funding the apparatus from the unreserved fund balance would have a better chance of passing as opposed to the taxation? Is that why the board ended up deciding to do it that way?
I mean, that's part of it. Like I said, last year, there wasn't unassigned fund balance to be used because it was more important that we increased the amount in that, how much we were holding. So, it is a way to help offset the current year by previous year. So we felt that it was important that we caught up knowing what we have coming down the road, that account is really, really important. So we're just able to do it in a way that we've historically done it in the past that's been successful. So, I mean, the board hasn't, I can't speak for everyone in their
Right.
exact decisions, but those are all things that we've talked about, that we're able to do that this year, and it's important that we get that fund up and make up for what we weren't able to deposit last year.
That's part of my concern, is going from 250,000, which failed, up to 350,000, even if it's coming from the unreserved fund balance, like, would that's a concern of mine, because if it fails again, we're gonna be even further behind.
Yeah.
But if we ask for 250, I don't know, it's kind of where my head is at, but I'll go around. Sam, go ahead.
Oh, wait, Peter, were you first? Okay. I know that the CIP committee also had that same concern, but when we looked at the matrix, if we only keep it at 250,000, we're not going to make it to buying the next apparatus. So it's more important that, and then you have to come back to the voters and raise it from taxation, that, you know, that extra, we'll say $100,000, just to, and I guess, I think that would be worse than to ask the voters for money again, as opposed to just increasing it from the unassigned fund balances this time. That's what my opinion.
Okay, Chief, then I'll go.
Mr. Chairman, just as a note also, previous to last year's request by taxation, there were 9 previous years' requests to use unassigned fund balance, and they all passed.
And I think if you look at the percentage, we were well north of 2/3. A lot of them were, there were some years where we had 75% voted yes for that.
Do you remember if the dollar, I'm like focused on the dollar amount, do you remember if it ever was at as high as 350? I know you said 500,000 or 400,000 back in
420 was the
2010,
first one.
but
420 was the initial deposit,
420.
but then that's on that page 3. The last few years was in 2022 and 2023, those were $250,000 deposits. That was the highest in recent years.
And to note, the second deposit that was requested for 500,000 that failed, if you look back at the deliberative session minutes, you can actually see the select board put forward a motion to reduce the 500,000 down to 0 because they knew that they had the grant coming in for that aerial ladder truck. And so the select board had put that forward, and the voters in the room at deliberative session actually voted it down and asked that the amount remain on the ballot for 500,000, but it was from taxation, and that failed. So there's been one passed initially by taxation, the second one where there was a lot of contention as to whether or not they should do a deposit that large from taxation, that failed. And then the only other time we've done a taxation article was last year, which failed. And so looking at the history, it really seemed clear to us in our analysis that the funding from unassigned fund balance is something that's potentially more palatable to voters.
okay. Peter?
And a question for the board real quickly, and then a question for you afterwards, if I could. For us, what was our recommendation as a board last year, for last year's CRF?
I believe it was like.
We can find that real quick.
Yeah,
We can-
okay, that'd be
We can
great.
pull up the warrant.
I think it was 12-2. That's my guess.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
I'm thinking 12-2. That's my
Something like that.
Yeah, sounds right.
12-2 in favor.
If you want to just give me a minute, I'll have to go to the website.
So while you're pulling that up, maybe Danielle would be able to answer this for me then. Essentially, like, if 2030 and 2032 roll around and we're under this schedule, like, nothing changes, we're operating this way. But we do, you know, we're able to leverage the fact that we have these funds and there are grants that are around. I mean, at that point, we'd potentially be up at a little bit, hopefully, you know, if it all goes according to plan, we'd be over 1.5 million in the fund. But let's say we didn't have to spend most of that, right, because we end up getting a great grant that it goes with that. Is there any other way we would be able to utilize this fund, or does that just mean that we would just be holding on to savings going forward? Like, would voters literally have to say, hey, we want to move this money?
Yes, so once money is deposited into a capital reserve fund, it can only be used for the purpose the fund was established for.
Yeah.
And if the voters ever wanted to move the money out of it, they would actually have to make a vote to either alter the purpose of the fund or a vote to close the fund and reopen a new one. So the monies in the fund that remain deposited will stay there and continue to earn interest until they can be spent on that purpose at a later date. That's part of why when capital reserve funds are crafted, we're always talking about the purpose shouldn't be to a specific end date. So the example that DRA always gives us is, you know, when you have that, you know, bicentennial celebration for town, it only happens in the 200th year. So at the end of that celebration, you then have to close your capital reserve fund, or otherwise you can't touch the money. And that has to be done by a vote at the legislative body. Or if you can do something that's more ongoing, the town will always have fire apparatus in some shape or form, then it will just continue to shift down the line, and maybe deposits could either be, smaller deposits in future years, or a year skipped here or there, depending on what grant funds are available.
So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So if we go into a totally different mode where we're receiving a lot of outside funding for this apparatus in the future and things change, we can't just say we're going to vote to take out, like, we realize, oh, we don't need to have 2 million in here, we only need 1 million in here. At that point, we're doing great. We can't simply ask to take 1 million out.
No.
We have to either all or nothing.
Yeah, so
right?
DRA would require that you have 2 articles, one to close it, all its balance would go into fund balance at the end of the year, and then a second article appropriating from unassigned fund balance the amount that you want to be in there. So it has to be a twofold, and the second article can be contingent on the first passing. So that would become a complication we would have to explain at a deliberative session.
I did answer to Peter's question. So last year, this was Article 17. The Select Board recommended unanimously, and the Budget Committee, the vote was 11 to 2 to 0, and it failed by 156 votes.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
Yeah, this question, I think, invariably always comes up for people. And in the unassigned fund balance, and I understand we try and have a 12% reserve. I just want to understand what we do if the unassigned fund balance gets low. How do we compensate for that? Do we factor in, or is it just what it is at the end of the year, period, Okay, all right.
Yep, it is what it is at the end of the year. It's a calculation, it's a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
The town's unassigned fund balance, you have to remember, is completely different than any other type of surplus that you
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
So the state and schools have different models.
Okay.
Their surplus resolves in cash.
Yeah.
They get to use those for their own purposes. The town's unassigned fund balance can be used for only 3 purposes. So we would have to either propose to reduce the town portion of the tax rate only. So if your tax bill's made up of 4 factors, state, county, school, and town, we can only impact the town's portion of that with the unassigned fund balance. Or we can propose specific warrant articles at the time of town meeting. So once per year, we can make a request to the legislative body for an item or separate warrant articles funded from unassigned fund balance, or a portion from unassigned fund balance. And then the third option, which is the last resort option, is the emergency spending. Emergency spending can only be done if the town encounters a true emergency. They have to petition DRA, so the state DRA has to weigh in. They have to provide all of the information, documentation to show the emergency. DRA would have to agree to it if they felt it was a compelling argument. The town then has to bring that information, including the DRA's recommendation, to a judge, to Superior Court. Superior Court then has to weigh in on it, and if Superior Court says yes, then we can spend from unassigned fund balance. The school can just hold a public hearing and then spend. The state doesn't have to have any input, they can just spend. So our unassigned fund balance, where it's a snapshot in time and it's not just a cash level, is really just a calculation. And it's supposed to be used to help maintain cash flow from one collection point to the next. If we didn't have enough and our cash flow lagged and we had to turn funds over to the school, they're allowed to get their full amount regardless of whether or not we collect any taxes. So if everybody stops collecting taxes and doesn't pay their bill, we still have to pay the school every amount that they're owed. The same with the state and the county. So the town would have to take out what they call TANs, which are tax anticipation notes, which are short-term borrowing. We don't get a say in what the interest rate is. We don't get to ask the voters their opinion on it. It's a law, we have to pay it, and so we have to take out those TANs, incur that cost to the taxpayer, and then pay out those other entities.
Okay.
So if we're short in unassigned fund balance, it can put an extra burden on the taxpayer.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Danielle. Where I was really going with that is I just wanted to make sure I understood properly that if it gets too low, you're not going to see an increase of taxation. So if this goes to get sold to the public, right, that's going to be an important thing to be able to communicate, I think, to people. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, other questions on town side CRF deposit? I think we're all set. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chair, can I just speak to the potential for 3 additional warrant articles that the board
Yep.
spoke to last night?
Yeah, I was actually gonna call on Kelly for that, but if-
Okay,
if-
that's fine, I'll let, yeah, if you want to, that's fine.
I was gonna move, yeah, Kelly and then Jared to
Okay.
just to speak about those real
Yeah,
quick.
absolutely.
You can assist if you.
By the way, I watched the assessment video that you mentioned. It was really good. That was a
The
very,
GTV did an.
Yeah, that was an
and-
excellent
And Scott
video.
did a very good job creating the script and narrating it, yeah.
yeah, it was good. I highly recommend. 98% on Rotten Tomatoes.
We'll let Scott know. He'll be thrilled. He worked really hard on that. So the select board discussed last night about potential additional warrant articles. We hadn't anticipated any, but after reviewing what the Budget Committee decided to cut, we had some discussions, particularly around DPW and the board's consensus. We haven't voted on any of these yet, but the feeling was that some of these larger ticket items that the Budget Committee chose to cut, that we could put towards the voters to see what their thoughts were. The first and the largest would be the DPW reclamation line, which was $450,000. As you know, we talked about the impact of, how many feet of road that reduces for DPW to either reclaim or maintain. And, we've been pushing for that fund to increase, so I think it's important that voters get to weigh in on that. So I'm anticipating that at least. And then also the DPW solid waste vehicle, the roll-off truck for $285,000. That is mainly because we've seen the changes in our ability to move that. That was the one that's the large roll-off trailer that we have now. This one is a little bit more compact, and if we need to call someone in to pick up those barrels or need to rent a truck or something like that, that roll-off trailer is more universal and easier to maintain. So that one is important, and we think that pushing it off, like we talked about, we've seen potential, or not potential, but we've seen increases in vehicles and are worried about pushing off so many of these vehicles, and we'll still need to purchase them in years out, and are worried about what that price increase is going to be. So again, giving that option to the voters. And then finally, the DPW solid waste vehicle for the Packer, for the garbage truck. I think most of you saw the week of New Year's, which feels like a lot longer than last week, but it was last week. We had truck issues where the rotation, we had a truck go down, we had to delay some trash pickup for a specific neighborhood. We've seen more and more ongoing maintenance with the solid waste vehicles, the ability to get parts, the ability for our in-house team to do repairs. And again, we're concerned about pushing that off and what that could mean in the future. If we had to rent a vehicle like that, it would be really difficult. I don't even know what we
I don't
would.
believe they
I don't even
exist
think
as
you can
rentals.
because of the arms that we have on ours. So, again, the concern about pushing all of these things off and what kind of impact that will have, we thought that it was important to give voters the ability to weigh in on that. So those are the 3 that we're considering. We haven't made official votes on if we're going to move any of these forward, but, respecting the Budget Committee's decision to remove it from the budget, but still also honoring our responsibility to look at future impacts and things like that, and giving the voters the ability to discuss it and make their own choice.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, Brian and then Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Kelly, was there a dollar amount for the Packer?
Yes, the Packer was on for $430,000.
Okay, thank you.
That was my question. Okay.
Sorry, I think
Other
that's the only one I
questions?
didn't say, maybe, yeah.
Has the board discussed using unreserved fund balance or just straight taxation?
All of these would, I will speak boldly and say, I believe all of these will be from taxation. We don't have any more in the unassigned fund balance to even consider distributing as of this point. We just got end of the year, and the 350 at one point was even pushing it, but I think we're okay now.
I'm going to bring an update to the board
Okay.
on Monday with our unaudited figures. But when we did our tax rate setting, we were already at the 12% minimum. So we didn't have any funding available in the unassigned fund balance to use at tax rate setting. So when it came time to look at separate warrant articles, we cautioned the board that we weren't expecting to be able to really put forward any articles. But the board felt it was so critical that the funding continue for that CRF, that if the voters were to agree to, put that forward, we're hopeful that when we look at our unaudited numbers, we'll come in right about that 12%, even with a $350,000 deposit towards a CRF.
Okay.
And the thing that I'll caution the select board on Monday is, even if we're a little bit above that 12%, what we're seeing in our budget as well as the school budget for what we're gonna have to collect for taxes, those figures are going up, so that percentage goes down, even if we do have additional revenues or under expenditures from this year.
Elizabeth?
I have a question and then a comment. So did the board move to separate out the sewer enterprise fund?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so
It's a separate.
That's a separate
yeah.
warrant article.
It's budget, sewer, of course, oh no, I literally have it right here. Yes, yes.
Okay. So, I guess, I think we should talk about this a little bit. I understand where the select board is coming from, but I think it's very risky. I mean, I think it's risk, there's risk on both sides, right? There's risk that critical equipment's gonna go down, and we're gonna be stuck not being able to provide services people count on. Although, remember, when we talked about this in our deliberations, Adam said he'd rather lose the equipment than the money from the reclamation line, or from the road plan. So that, to me, indicates he thought that equipment could make it one more year. But I think it's also risky because, I think voters have been, obviously this is my opinion only, but voters have been mad the last several years. They've been mad by the number of things on the warrant. They've been mad that they've been asked for what a lot of people considered extras. And we're not presenting a flat budget. We are asking for a very, very modest increase, but it's still an increase. And I worry that, in a sense, this is gonna backfire and sink all the other work that we've done.
Of course, that all of that is a potential, but I think, to your point, you mentioned the vehicles or the road reclamation, and the budget committee cut chunks from both. And I
Yeah.
think that another thing that I'm worried about is compacting all of those things that we just keep pushing off in years out. What does the next 3 years look like? And I think if voters see that and want to, take on some of those things this year, that again, the messaging is really important and the explanation of that. But we've just seen such volatility with vehicles, also the timeframes in which we're able to get vehicles, like across the board, even cruisers. That's been a huge thing. So it is risky, and I shared with the board last night my apprehension with adding more warrant articles to the ballot in March, and we discussed that. But I think it is also important, we've been having conversations for years about the road plan, and if people feel very passionately about wanting to maintain our roads and maintain our investments, that's something that they can, vote that way.
I don't disagree with you, but if you remember, this year is different. We have made this huge investment in our people. It's not going to be year after year like this. This year is different because we are bringing our employees up to a certain level. We are resolving this problem about underpaying our employees. And as a result, other things have to be put on hold for a year. I mean, we always have capital problems, you're right, and I know, we've been on this over and over again, but I don't think it's really accurate to portray this year as, well, if we don't do it this year, we're just kicking the can down the road and it just goes on and on and on. Next year, we can look at another very modest increase and start to rebuild some of these capital things because our employees will be on like a maintenance plan. I just really worry that voters are going to be annoyed and just say no to everything. And then it would be catastrophic, I think, to end up with default again. And none of these things get passed. I don't know, that's all I'll say.
I share some of your concerns, and I shared it with the select board last night. Like I said, we haven't voted on any of these, so feel free to come on Monday and share your thoughts and feelings as a member of the public. And yeah, I agree. I think it's all risky. If we put it on the ballot, that's a possible outcome. If we don't put it on the ballot, the what ifs, if we don't do these things now, is also, kind of up in the air. So I think it's risky either way. And I don't disagree with you. I think there's a couple different approaches that we can take, but we haven't made that decision yet. Those are just things that we discussed. We're not looking forward or looking at any other options to even consider pushing forward at this point. It's those three, and we may or may not.
Okay, Peter, then Laura.
I guess I'm just going to argue with Elizabeth a little bit on this. I think there's another way to look at what you're saying right now, right? First off, I'd want to get a real good sense of like how many warrant articles we'd really be looking at if we're potentially looking at anything else. Are we potentially looking at anything else, or is that the three that?
What, you mean like total warrant articles?
In terms of,
from
no,
the
additional
town?
select board articles that you'd be putting forward?
No,
That is
those are
three,
the
right?
only three that we are considering.
Okay. Just wanna make
Outside
sure.
of, I just want to, hold on, if you don't mind. So we have the general fund article,
Yep.
the sewer enterprise fund article, the CBA article, the fire apparatus, and then we also have two that are, so the first one, I don't want to get into this too much unless you
Well,
want to talk
they're
about.
non-appropriation articles.
Right.
Yeah.
But the cable access revolving fund franchise fee amount modification, that was a lot, which we could talk about later, but it's not appropriation articles, and the solar exemption changes that were recommended. So that's,
That's 9,
So
isn't it?
no.
I just want to
Oh,
kind
sorry,
of
wait.
pause on all of that and like, what if we just think of it a different way? I know we can react to this. I feel like sometimes we overreact to any given year. People know this is the reason why I have opposed a tax cap in our town. The reason is because of our form of government. Well, our form of government also means that our citizens have to be involved. And so that means that when they show up to the polls in March, they're gonna get a little bit more information than they might have gotten in a city, right? Because in a city, the aldermen and the town are taking care of a lot of those decisions without them. Well, here, we've chosen to continue as town meeting, right? In a town of 18 or 19,000, we're continuing as town meeting. We might be SB2, but we are still town meeting. So I feel like we should be advocating for our voters being more involved in the democratic process, right? So that can mean, hey, we as a board decided, whew, we're not comfortable with this general fund budget, so we have decided we're gonna do whatever cuts we need to do, but we are going to say, voters, hey, we want you to know, it's not that we're saying that these things aren't important, it's just that we had to make decisions. So now you're making a decision of the general fund, and now you're making a decision for these additional expenses. I just think that's how our government works in our town. And we should be modeling that, not like expecting that all of our citizens are just gonna be dummies and don't wanna look at anything. No?
Laura?
Thank you. So that actually leads right into my comment, which is that we hear so often that
the voters want to say, the community wants a say. So this is how they get their say. You can't have no warrant articles and also have a say. So if we are kind of calling out specific things, then voters literally do get a very specific say, whereas otherwise they don't. So voters can't have it both ways. You can be more impactful with your say, or you get no warrant articles and maybe voting is fast, but like the decisions are made. So it's one or the other, it's not both. That's all.
Olivia and Allison.
Going off the same both ways part, I think it's important that citizens are involved and informed, and I think it's important to have the warrant articles like Kelly had mentioned. But I think it's also important that all the citizens of Goffstown understand the risk they're running by doing things like not maintaining their DPW trucks. You know, the area of town that didn't get their trash picked up was definitely my area on super windy, cold days with everything blowing around. That's what happens. And I think it's important for people to understand that if we're going to cut these lines, if we need to have these lines down and we're not going to pass warrant articles, that these are the real risks that they're gonna run. That they're either going to be picking up their trash up and down the street for 2 days straight, or maybe they have a truck that could already manage to do it. So I just hope that people are coming, they're paying attention, they're understanding that they don't get to pick and choose when things work and when things don't. It's just not the way it goes.
Allison?
So I'm wondering about how we can communicate it better, or maybe we even do and I don't realize it, to the community, meaning so that not everybody sits here and listens to our meetings and hears what we're talking about. So voting day comes and they get there and it's 3 pages both sides and they're frustrated and they feel like it's overwhelming. I agree, I think they should still have a say, but is there, like, how soon can they see that wording? I feel like you might already know this. And is that something that we as a budget committee, even if we do it individually, can be pushing so people have a heads up before they get to voting, so they can actually stop and think about it and go, okay, so do I agree that we should put money in, or do I think that we need a new trash truck? How does it impact me? And how long before they have to actually vote can they get, their own questions answered?
Do you mean like the voter's guide, or are you thinking
Yeah,
something else?
maybe it's in the voter's guide, but I even mean almost like flooding it. I don't know how many people even read the voter's guide, but yes, I guess similarly, if
We
it's.
send it to every house, so I hope a lot.
You do?
You
I don't
do.
feel like I've
We
ever
sure
seen
do.
a voter's guide.
Mail one to every single
Apparently, I
house.
put it in recycling, which may happen in a lot of cases, but I didn't have to. I was here. I was listening already.
We also have
So
it
probably-
digitally as well. every
You what?
year. It's digital as well.
All right, so that's probably what you're gonna say. But again, if we're talking about working better as a group, everybody pushing the voter's guide and where they can find this information before voting day, like, we all say, go out and vote. Vote in a week. Giving them the link to where they can find the things they're gonna vote for. I feel like the more we push it, the more information they'll have.
Doug?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to go in line with Elizabeth here a little bit more here. I think she's right. I think taxpayers we risk that they're just going to say no to everything. And I think part of the risk is, and again, and this kind of goes to the wording thing that's being said here, is if they see all these things, maybe there's a risk, depending on how it's worded, that they look at the fire truck and vote no all the way down, not realizing that's coming from a different funding source. So I want to be careful here that that could be a potential risk here. That's an important, a priority to get that as opposed to other things.
Danielle?
I was just going to answer the question about the information being available. So yes, there's the voter's guide that goes out in February. It's printed, it's also available digitally, and we do put out, social media posts and things saying it's on our website. Here's the link. I think we were gonna put a banner on our website as well, on the homepage. As far as the warrant itself with the draft language, that'll be available, and posted at all the polling locations as required. It's also available on our website once it's prepared. We will have a draft for the committee next week, so the language will be out there and available to people to start seeing those articles. We don't have a final number from the planning board yet about how many zoning articles they're likely to put forward, but we do have an estimate from the planning director. And so when you take that in totality with the articles that the board's discussing, those last three being up in the air, even if we assumed all three were being added on, it looks like in totality, there are gonna be about 10 articles less than we saw in previous years. So that's a good thing. That's definitely gonna save us a couple pages on the ballot. And of course, I think I speak for others in this room as well. I would love to see some of these, budget items coming first on the ballot, but by state law, the zoning articles must appear after election of officers prior to any other articles. So that's why in the order of things, they're up at, slots 2 through 8, as opposed to being like page 4 on the ballot.
Laura?
Thank you. So when it comes to people voting, some of the onus has to be on the public. If you want to pay attention or you care enough, pay attention. If you don't, it's not your thing. You elected officials to do a lot of the work for you. Everything will come recommended or not. So people and I don't say don't care enough in a bad way, but feel like it doesn't matter as much to them, or they trust who they voted for, they still have the opportunity to say, okay, the select board and the budget committee really overwhelmingly recommended this, so I'll defer to them and I'll vote accordingly. Or they're gonna say, okay, this fire thing is super important to me specifically for some reason, I'm gonna vote my own way regardless of everything else. Same with like a DPW warrant. If they seem to care or not and they have the information, they'll vote their own way. So voters have so many options. I don't personally, for myself, care if I go in and I'm voting on 9 pages or 1. So it's neither here nor there, like, to me personally, but there are so many options as what community members and voters can do prior to the date to be more or less informed and still feel like they've taken part. But at some point, they just have to be okay with that or change their choices. I don't know if, because I am one to get the information out there. I don't think that's a secret, and I want to get more information because more information is clearly better. Then everyone will be informed and everyone will have the facts and the details. But at this point, and maybe this is a jaded view, I don't know, people that want the information are getting it. People that are unsure will seek it out, especially if they know someone on board. And people that don't want it, they're not going to do that. That covers everybody. So I don't know if there's anything we can do at this point other than what's already being done to try and spread more correct, valid information. Because at some point, it's just all out there, and it's like wallpaper. It's not going to matter.
Olivia?
I think one of the big barriers of spreading effective information right now is the language that's actually used. I think it's really dense. I know we have requirements with the DRA and everything that we have to follow, but I think us as committee members and community members need to really help the public decode what this actually means. And layman's regular, we're just having a conversation kind of terms, because it is really overwhelming to go into a voting booth and have all of the articles and try to sort out what multiple pages of words and terms that are either used differently or words that are completely outside of someone's skill set, things that they might say, well, I don't know what this means. This isn't the kind of thing I understand or that I'm familiar with, but I do care about my taxes and I can't afford to pay more money this year. So I think it's really important that we all use our skill sets and our position here to share that information with anyone that may need it, because a lot of people aren't comfortable saying, I just honestly don't get what this means, you know, like, I'm not an unintelligent person, I don't know what this means, and I'm not sure how to vote effectively.
Frank?
I'm going to echo some of what Doug and Elizabeth said. We are definitely in a unique year where we're in default, and we've made investments in our people to get their salaries up. But everything we do comes with a risk and a reward. You know, at the low end, you know, God forbid, we're in default again and none of the warrant articles pass. On the other side, the budget passes and all the warrant articles pass. So in essence, what we're trying to do here is predict a little bit. And we've all taken the public's temperature in our own ways, but my concern is if there are going to be 3 warrant articles for, the reclamation, which there's a risk reward with that. If roads aren't tended to, they go down quick. The roll-off truck and also the solid waste packer. My sense as to this is people are going to look at a $1.1 million in warrant articles, and that's going to be a tough sell. So I would caution towards limiting the amount of warrant articles, and I think that would give them a better chance of getting passed. So that's it.
Go ahead, Laura.
So I think, so the voters don't have to look at it as $1.1 million in articles. They can look at it as $400,000 for this, $350 for this. That's part of how they get to make more specific decisions. It's not all or nothing. They can pick and choose, so they don't have to say yes to whatever the total amount of the warrant articles ends up being. They can say yes to one of them. So I think that's one of the benefits of it, is if they don't care about 5 of those things and they don't want to vote for it, great. But if they do care about the one, then they're voting for, $250 or whatever it is that they see as important.
So I'm gonna jump in. I think we're discounting the job that the committee did the last couple of weeks. I think we got to a place where, yeah, we made tough calls and tough cuts, but at the end of the day, like 1.5%, I think most of us can jump on board supporting a budget like that. I think that we had to do the select board's job for them, quite frankly. And we did it, and we did it well. And now the select board is gonna come back and add other warrant articles. And I think that our job is to look out for the taxpayer, look out, have a responsible budget. And I think that we did that. So we invested in our employees, which is something that we've been trying to do for years and years. But I think by adding the things back onto the warrant, that the elected budget committee has decided, not a priority this year, the priority is our employees, I think is discounting the job that we did collectively as a committee. So I hope to send that message, Kelly, if you can reiterate that, me as a member of the board, not anything else, I think that we did a good job with the budget, and I hope that the select board will recommend our budget as is, and doesn't need to add the extra warrant articles on there.
Joe, you're certainly welcome to come to public comment if you want to share those sentiments on how you feel slighted from the select board. But I mean, if you watch our conversations with department heads and how that budget was set and why, that's our job to support our departments. And I'm not going to get into that with you because it's here nor there, obviously for your opinion. But I think that you're also really discrediting the voters and their ability to read the warrant articles and make those decisions for themselves. So, yeah, I mean, you're allowed to share that. I think, again, the board has not made a decision. Those are just things that we've discussed. And I think our job to balance the capital investments and the impactment in the next couple years and what that looks like, even on the action matrix itself for CIP, is something that we're thinking about. And I think voters are thinking about that too. And it's important to give them the choice. So I don't know what will happen on Monday, if we'll vote as a committee to push those forward or not, but you're all welcome to come and give your input.
Respectfully, I think the select board is doing too much to represent department heads and not representing the town and the voters that elected them.
I'm not gonna have that discussion
where I
with
am, so.
you here now.
Sounds great.
That's really not appropriate for this time, but
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, wow, this has taken a dark turn pretty quickly. I am more inclined to agree with Joe on this one, but I do think that this is damaging in a way. I think deciding whether or not yes, the voters need to have a say, and on certain things, that's relatively easy for them to do. Evaluating whether we need a new Packer, I don't think we can expect voters to have any information to make that decision. That's our job as a committee. I only watched a few minutes of your meeting. I only had a few minutes last night. Did Adam come in and talk to you guys? The part I saw was you guys were discussing solid waste and Adam was not there.
yeah, Adam wasn't available. We did put forth a couple request items for him for information that he'll be bringing on Monday.
Okay, so, I mean, when he was here and speaking to us, I did not get the impression, I got a different impression from him. That, yeah, certainly he understood what we were trying to do, and this was a blow to his department, and there's no doubt the DPW took the biggest hit. But that it was not as much of a crisis as I'm getting this feeling that is now as it's being portrayed. And I would also say, I mean, what we did this year was very unique, and we did set priorities. But the thing about priorities is you have to have the discipline to see them through, or having a priority is meaningless. And I think that's what the whole idea was that we were going to tell voters, this is important, and this is why you should support it. And we're gonna put a pin in everything else. And I think, I guess there's no point in keeping going on this because we're just repeating ourselves, but I find this very frustrating that we've done all this work and now we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Can I ask a clarifying?
Go ahead.
So Kelly, is it possible that the select board could recommend the budget and still put forward the warrants? Or would it have to be you don't recommend the budget?
No, the budget would be a
It's separate.
separate
Okay, that's
article.
what I thought.
So it's not really a question of the budget. It's these additional items that we're considering putting as separate warrant articles for the voters to decide on those individual line items.
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you.
Brian?
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I would just say, and I do want to echo what you were saying, Joe and Elizabeth, but with all the potentially additional special warrant articles, I think it might be a real thing. I think an average voter might have article fatigue, especially when there's a capital expenditure in front of them. So I'm going to say, for me personally, I'm going to caution about these additional special warrants because the average voter's going to come in and say, well, okay, we want 450,000 here, 285, 430. You know, I think it's going to be damaging the sense of them seeing it multiple times, asking for money through taxation, and I think it could backfire. So that's my thought.
Okay, Jared, go ahead.
Kelly and the select board members, thank you for bringing this to us. I look forward to having something actionable that we can actually vote on to have a dialogue with this. As a general comment, I would be surprised if we vote to recommend something that we approved to cut from the operating budget if it's raised from taxation. However, I do think that we are repeating ourselves over and over again. I'd like to move on with our agenda. Motion to move forward.
I'm not going to entertain that. I'm going to let people speak.
Motion
But
override the chair.
This is going to take longer than finishing this conversation.
Is it? Because we're just all raising our hands multiple
I
times
can
over and
withdraw
over
my
again.
hand and move forward. I'm fine with that.
Well, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? No second. Motion fails. All right, Olivia, go ahead.
My understanding with Adam wasn't so much that the vehicles were expendable or not needed right now, but that he couldn't really say whether they were going to make it through another year where they were consistently breaking down and struggling with them, and that it took a long time to replace. So, I I guess that was just my understanding from Adam's point, was that he really wanted to focus on roads, but he couldn't guarantee that the trucks were gonna work.
Okay, other comments about these warrant articles? Okay, so next week we'll have, I'm sure, another robust conversation about this. Thank you, Jared, for pointing that out. We still have time. With that, Jared, do you want to speak to? the
Absolutely, let's
school
put
board
another warrant article in front of
Select school board's
everybody.
warrant article.
It's going to be a fun one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't have the exact wordage because we don't have our meeting minutes approved, but we did take back what the Budget Committee asked us to do at the school board. We had looked at having a CRF of roughly $400,000. The Budget Committee said, hey, can we actually reduce that to $300,000? I took that back to the board. Based on the discussion, they're in agreement and concurrence with the leadership that the Budget Committee has had. So we are putting together for our third warrant article, first for chairs, or for officers, second for our operating budget, third one for the CRF, and hopefully we're done after that. But we are looking to put in $300,000 into our existing Facilities Capital Reserve Fund that was established in 2019, with the sum to come from our unassigned fund balance surplus available for transfer, if any is available on July 1st, 2025. No new amount to be raised from taxation requires a majority vote. That's from our DRA. We went through our lawyers. They said that they're okay with this language that you asked us to add. As stated in our last meeting, we are looking for three things, but because we are reducing it, we will not be putting money aside for our field. We will be using $50,000 for our IT firewall that's needed to secure, some of the security that we have within cybersecurity space for our students. And then the remaining $250,000 will go to our cistern that we're looking to have done this summer. We'll be pulling $50,000 out of our existing money to bring that up to $300,000, because it is a $300,000 statement of work that we have to replace our cistern. I will entertain whatever questions people have.
Go ahead, Peter.
Jared, you mentioned the fields. Did you guys discuss in any greater detail the possibility of proposing a CRF for the fields in the future?
We talked about it, and there was general consensus to have it all as one, and this is actually a perfect reason. We want to skip a field payment, and that would potentially mean that we have to go out another year for a replacement. And if we can't do it, then we'd have to pull it from our operating lines. So we'd have to make up the money to do it. So we consistently look at having one CRF for all of our district items versus having ones for schools or for athletics.
Could you explain that again?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
So, for
Trying to
instance,
catch
we
up.
have $50,000 that we're trying to put in for every year, so
Yeah.
that we have the required money in 10 years or 12 years. I think it was 12 years. Well, we're skipping a payment, so we have to put it to 13. Well, what if we can't make it 13 and we have to go to 12? The money's not there because we skipped a payment. We could use other monies in our CRF for that field replacement. That's why.
So more flexibility essentially is.
Flexibility, because, we have, as Sam knows from our CIP, we have millions of dollars every year, and we're trying to replace $250,000 to $300,000 and prioritize those items.
Other questions for Jared?
This was voted on by our committee, and it was approved 8-1.
Okay, so we'll
That'll be a public.
Yep, there'll be a public hearing on that language as well, and then the committee will be able to weigh in after that.
Do we
Go
have
ahead, Sam.
warrant articles from the public yet?
I don't
The
think
town
so.
has not received any.
And unless they have a
School's not
dollar
received any
amount, we
It's
don't
till
vote
what,
on
the
them.
11th?
No, the deadline will
Was it-
be Tuesday, the 14th.
The 14th, thank you.
Even if they didn't have a dollar amount, I'd still like to know about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanna know
No
if we
Main
knew 'em-
Street?
I wanna know if we knew them early.
no-
Isn't every voter like Sam?
I love it.
That's what I was thinking.
I will
Every
read
voter is
10
going in
pages of
like
warrant
Sam.
articles.
Go ahead,
I
Jared.
believe there was a question from Elizabeth.
Is Main Street submitting?
Main Street and Crispin House have both communicated me that they are not requesting an appropriation this year.
So for business, we have a meeting next Tuesday, public hearing on our version of the budget. I guess I want to solicit typically the chair does a lot of this stuff, but if there's members of the committee that want to get involved in the presentation aspect of it, reach out to me. I'm happy to split up the responsibility if
I will,
somebody.
Joe. I'll help you with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds
Yeah, I'm
much-
happy to
that
split
sounds so
some
much
slides
fun.
up and do some assigning.
Sure.
So we can all kind of own it,
Is
because there
that
were a lot of changes.
In the auditorium, because it's listed
It's in the-
here.
Correct. I was just going to provide that update. So today, we received word from the school about, just a couple hours ago, that they're recommending shifting the public hearing down to, well, the public hearing is still in the theater, but the deliberative sessions
Will be in the gym
in the gym.
In the gym.
for the
They were there a
deliberative
few
session.
years ago.
Yeah. For the town and the school, the deliberative.
Is that because it was pretty,
It was, I think, in
last year?
anticipation, we can fit more people into the gymnasium.
okay, that's I think a good call.
Yeah.
So the public hearing though is next week in the theater still.
About the
Olivia?
public hearing, just because there was confusion last year about what questions could be asked and answered, how is that gonna work this year?
Well,
Just
I
so
mean,
we're
it's-
all on the same page.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
our budget, we own the budget. We'll be presenting to the public. If there's questions, we can lean on some staff for support, but
Okay.
we can also answer,
Okay.
philosophical questions like why we decided to push the Packer off a year or something like that.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
So who did I get the list of people that are willing to help out?
Oh, that was me, but I was
Elizabeth,
also,
Sam,
are there
Frank.
dates for the deliberative sessions?
Yes, the school board, or the school is going to be doing it on Monday, February 3rd at 7 PM. And again, that will be in the gymnasium now. I believe they have a school date, or a snow date of Wednesday.
That's what we were
That's what we
told,
were told.
but
Or
maybe-
maybe there's been a change. The town is on Tuesday, February 4th at 7 PM, again in the gymnasium. And provided the school does not need accommodations, we had planned on a snow date of Thursday.
So not a Saturday.
Correct.
I'm sorry, what was the school date again? I missed that. What-
Monday, February 3rd, 7 PM.
But Jared's shaking his head.
No, that date's accurate,
That's
Oh.
correct. Do you have a snow date
the 4th.
set?
Oh,
No.
fun.
You can't.
A double header.
That's why I think we need to chat.
Our date had been approved and accepted and reserved that way, so.
Wait, it actually
So-
is okay for them both to have the snow date of the 4th, because if one day it snows, right?
It may not the other day.
Yeah. What,
No,
No,
is the initial, the town's
the town
planned
initial
meeting.
is.
TBD. Let's just
Yeah,
put it
they should be
TBD
here
at this
till 1
point.
a.m.
Are they both at 7?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna let you guys figure that out and hopefully we'll get some clarification once we get
I
there.
think a double header is great. One.
All right, any other new business
All day.
for the committee? Anyone here to speak for public comment? Come on up. And if you don't mind just signing the paper too, while you're up there too. Thank you.
I am Megan Boyd, writing while I talk, and I'm at Reed Street. Just, I wanted to say briefly, there was a lot of talk around the table about what voters do and don't understand and what they're feeling fatigue about and what they're not feeling fatigue about. I'm a constituent, I'm a voter, and I perfectly understand that I don't represent every voter in town. But I do think that, at least based on the discussion that I've heard, you're not giving the voters a whole lot of credit for being able to understand the nuance of what's going on here. You have done a wonderful job taking into consideration people not wanting to pay taxes and the amount that you've reduced the budget, and I've been paying attention, I've been watching the meetings either in person or online. But I don't think that that negates being able to put on warrant articles for the public to look at and thoughtfully think through and understand. And on the one hand, you're saying that this is a unique year and we've invested in staff, and the voters are going to understand that this is a unique year, and so they'll understand that in following years we can invest in X, Y, Z. But then in the next breath, you say, but voters aren't going to be able to handle additional warrant articles because that's just too much information, or they're not going to be able to understand the budget committee cutting certain things, but then the select board adding in certain things. And I just, as a voter, it's frustrating to hear that talked about in that way, because I appreciate the ability to look through those things, consider them on an individual basis, and make my voice heard as a voter. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Welcome.
Good evening. Hold on, let me sign this thing. My name's Tim Searles, Montreal Hill Road. I said it last meeting, I'll say it again, I think you guys have come a long way in the last month and a half, 2 months, and I can't thank you enough, and where it is now, I am far more comfortable voting for whatever's on the ballot for increases rather than previously when you started this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Others? Okay, seeing that, I'm going to close public comment and entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
No, entertain a motion. Who's going to make the motion?
I'll make a motion to
Laura
adjourn.
Stevens makes the motion. Doug Pound seconds.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned at 7:47. It was unanimous.